get out of our new house right now, eh? Why is this so different from our previous conversations? Despite these issues, our married life continued peacefully. Eventually, we started planning to buy a house. We had talked about buying a house before marriage, deciding to do so before having children. At that time, the idea of living with my mother-in-law came up briefly, but Michael said, "I think Mom would probably prefer not to live with us." So we decided to live separately from her, which was a relief considering our strained relationship. On the other hand, I was concerned about my own parents. "Michael, if it's okay with you to live separately from your mom, could we live with my parents? My mom isn't in the best of health and my dad is getting on in years, so I'm worried about them. It would be great if we could live together so I can help them out anytime." When I asked this, Michael readily agreed, saying, "I think that's a great idea." We were planning on buying a fairly large house anyway, and we can invite them to move in when it's ready. At this point, I was somewhat concerned because he seemed a bit distracted, but I was happy that he agreed, so I didn't press the issue further. When I told my parents about the living arrangement, they were very happy. Just to be sure, Michael also informed my mother-in-law that we would be living with my parents in our new house. Right after that, my mother-in-law contacted me, complaining, "You're really self-centered. You decided to live with your parents without even consulting me." "I'm sorry. We did consider living with you, but I refused to live with a daughter-in-law like you." Her words hurt me, but since we never intended to live together in the first place, her refusal wasn't a problem. While continuing our meetings with the real estate company, we were living in an apartment. One day, an unexpected person visited our apartment. It was my sister-in-law. She had gotten married and moved out, but I'd heard from Michael that she divorced after her husband cheated on her and she returned to her parents' house. "I quit my job right when I got divorced. I don't feel like working yet, but I need money to live." When I heard her story, it seemed she had come to ask Michael for a loan. I went to call Michael, and for some reason, he reluctantly came to the living room.
I couldn't help but raise my voice in surprise, so...
It seemed strange that he didn't have any cash on hand, even though he should be earning well above average.
I just don't carry cash around, so there's anyone? Besides, my mom's savings are running low, and I can't even pay this month's rent. Can you help out?
Michael glanced at me effly. I felt a moment of discomfort, but reluctantly decided to give her some money myself. Afterwards, my sister-in-law quickly checked the amount and thanked me before leaving. Quickly checked the number of bills, said thank you with just a word and left immediately. Later, I tried to talk to Michael about my sister-in-law and my mother-in-law's detailed living situation and when they would return the money I lent them.
However, he responded quite irresponsibly. "Well, things seem to be tough for them, right? They'll pay back the money soon. We're living together after all, no need to rush."
Since then, I've been spending my days with anxiety as my sister-in-law started coming more frequently to borrow money, and not through Michael like at first, but directly asking me for money. I probably shouldn't have given her money in the first place. Maybe she got carried away. We have our own household budget, so it's hard to just give away money as she demands. But when I politely refuse, my sister-in-law gets furious, and starts yelling, "You two live together and don't even have $1,000 to spare." I'm unemployed and barely getting by. I'm a part of this family too, right? You could at least help out a little still. I apologize, saying it's difficult, and manage to send her away for the time being. Then she immediately comes back, this time bringing my mother-in-law with her. "But you're being too selfish. Michael's sister is your sister too. You can't just leave your family struggling while you live comfortably. That's just cruel." "That's right. Do you want us to starve to death?" "You might as well have just said that. I never should have given my blessing for this marriage. We're just too pitiful." They barged in, yelling at me, and made their way inside. Then they started rummaging through my drawers. "You keep money here, don't you? Please wait. This is causing me a lot of trouble." They didn't listen to my pleas and took the living expenses I had stored in envelopes. "If this continues any longer, our life will be ruined." I stood there, dumbfounded, watching them leave as I felt a mix of fear and desperation. That night, when I told Michael about my anxiety and fear, he unexpectedly used it off. "They're in trouble, so it can't be helped." "You're my wife, right? My mom is right, we're family. Just handle it somehow. I'm tired and it has nothing to do with me." Saying that he went to bed alone. Michael works at an advertising agency, and indeed, he seemed very busy at work around that time. He was working late almost every day, and there were many weekends and business trips, so maybe he just couldn't afford to be concerned about anything else. But it's really tough for me when he won't even listen to my problems about family matters. We finally got our own house, but can we really continue to live like this with the family? With the family relationships in this state, I was already harboring great anxiety about the long married life ahead of me. And as for Michael, he wasn't home as much, to the point where it couldn't just be chalked up to his job being busy, and our conversations also diminished. Unspeakable suspicions spread in my mind. I had many sleepless nights for a while. And to avoid being swindled out of money, I took it upon myself to avoid meeting my sister-in-law and mother-in-law. I would go out on days when it seemed likely they would visit, and I avoided conversations over the phone or email. Thanks to these efforts, I didn't give them any money after that. Although I received sarcastic and insulting words via email almost daily, by intentionally being out and not meeting them directly, I somehow managed to get by without giving them any money. At the experience, the matter of our new home proceeded smoothly, and a few months later, the house was completed as planned. And thinking ahead to a two-family dwelling, we installed bathrooms and toilets on both the first and second floors. The kitchen was spacious and easy to use, but the layout for doing housework was perfect. We planned to call my parents over after we finished moving in. And just when our living environment was set up, and it was time to call my parents over, shocking words came out of Michael's mouth. "About this house, I've decided to live here with my family. So can you not call Emily's parents over? And you get out." "What? Why?" This was completely different from our previous discussions. As I stood there dumbfounded and asked, my husband said even more shocking and hurtful words. "What are you playing dumb for? It's your fault, isn't it? I just stared at my husband's furious face, completely stunned. I don't understand what you're saying. Please explain it to me. I know that you have been harassing my mom and sister. You turn them away, even though they've come all the way here. Don't answer the phone and ignore their texts. Of course, I have no memory of ever harassing them. It seems like Michael has some kind of misunderstanding. I do feel sorry about that, but I can't keep giving them money any longer. It would be a problem. Money. You're so stingy. It wouldn't hurt to help them out a little. Do you know they've been asking for thousands of dollars each time? We have a mortgage to pay on the house. We can't do this. My family is your family too. Don't you want to help your own family? Why are you saying the same things as your mother and sister? I couldn't hold back my tears any longer, and they started to flow. But without trying to understand how I felt, Michael furiously banged on the table. You've cornered them so much that my mom and sister are both hurt. They're both mentally oaken down. Mentally oaken down. I never thought you were such a terrible person. Wait, I just wanted to protect our household finances. If I had kept giving them thousands of dollars, it would have affected our future. I'm sorry about your sister and mom, but I think that's their own problem. I can't keep answering to their unreasonable demands. I'll protect my mom and sister. So I'm going to call them here and live together with them. You've cornered my important family, and you don't understand how busy I am with work. I don't even want to see your face anymore, so get out of here right away. And from now on, this situation was unexpected for me, so to ensure nothing like this happens again, I'll be recording our conversation from here on out.
Michael reluctantly agreed, though his face showed his displeasure.
That night, I wrapped up all discussions related to the divorce. Since we had separate finances, there was no need for property division. Michael had bought the house under his name initially, so he would continue paying the mortgage. After settling everything, Michael signed the divorce papers. I quickly packed my bags, took the divorce papers, and left the house. On the doorstep, I suddenly felt the need to ask Michael something. Hey, we've just decided on everything, but you're going to be unemployed, aren't you? Are you really sure you can handle the mortgage? I had expected him to get angry or make excuses, but instead, Michael avoided eye contact and gave a foolish reply. Oh, what are you talking about? His attempt to play dumb frustrated me to my core. Yes, I knew. I knew that Michael was about to be fired from the advertising agency he worked at. That despite his predicament, he was acting clueless, and I was beyond pissed. I couldn't deal with his family anymore. However, I was now a stranger to him. But it was none of my business anymore. He could do whatever he wanted. After all, I had already investigated his actions and taken necessary precautions. And then, carrying my bags, I returned to my parents' home to start a new chapter of my life. My parents seemed somewhat sad about my divorce, but when I expressed my desire to support them, they warmly welcomed me. Life became peaceful again as I commuted from my parents' house to work. That's when it happened. One day, while at work, I checked my smartphone and saw a ton of missed calls from Michael. Now practically a stranger, an ex-husband, what could he possibly want now? However, I had an inkling. I had no intention of calling back, but when he called again while I was at home, I reluctantly decided to answer. Emily, don't you dare ignore my calls.
Emily, don't you dare ignore my calls.
I was at work. What do you expect? That's shame. Now, what do you want?
I can't pay the mortgage on the house. If this continues, I'm gonna lose my home.
Oh, I responded indifferently, but inside I thought, serves you right. That's why I told him. Did he really think he could manage without a job? The bank contacted me. My mom and my sister are ignoring me. I've been deceived by all of you. His story was falling apart. I was already fed up and didn't have the words to respond. Michael, a former section chief at the advertising agency, was known to have issues with his work attitude, especially towards a female colleague. Which had become a significant problem, he was persistently asking her about her personal life and engaging in excessive physical contact when no one was looking. Or unable to bear it any longer, she consulted her superiors. The issue escalated quickly, and Michael was repeatedly warned. Even though we were divorced, I was embarrassed to have been associated with him. Steve, who introduced me to Michael, works at the same company as him, so he obviously knew about this situation and seemed to have been giving Michael some harsh advice. I wonder if he didn't feel the crisis of me finding out at that point. Even in such a situation, it seems that he couldn't quit his job. After option, on the other hand, the company was actively working on improving the work environment for women, and they were taking a serious view of Michael's actions. He thought he was doing it secretly, but it seems he wasn't careful enough. Eventually, after being awed up at numerous meetings and deemed to be too much to overlook, he was fired. I heard about this whole situation through Sarah via Steve, and the day after we woke up, Michael was formally given his notice of termination. On the day I decided to divorce, he had made a foolish response when confronted about being unemployed, but he couldn't fully accept the fact that he was being fired and probably just wanted to bluff his way through. I definitely won't sympathize with him, but honestly, I'm starting to feel sorry for him. So what if you say that? We're divorced now. We are strangers now, so deal with your own debts. Even if we're divorced, I'm still your ex-husband. What's with that attitude? I don't want to hear that from someone who got fired. You thought I didn't know. So you did know. I thought something was off that time. Yeah, I heard it from Sarah through Steve. So that's how it is. There's no point in talking to Michael any longer. I wanted to hang up the phone quickly. But from the other end of the line, he kept trying to hold me back.
Quiet, please. I want to cancel the divorce. Let's get married again.
No way. Why should I remarry you after you took away the house? My mom and sister are just being selfish. I'll kick them out. And Emily got it all wrong. And wrong. About what? She won't talk or come home. And upon checking, you were having an affair. I can't remarry someone like that.
That's not true. Misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding.
Do you think it's a misunderstanding? Haven't you heard from the lawyer? I was the one who sent a lawyer after Michael. He said people forms traits. It Grilliers Trovides have been investigating this matter for quite some time. when I was feeling exhausted from dealing with financial requests from my sister-in-law and mother-in-law. And my mother-in-law, Michael, started working overtime and going on more business trips, and he stopped coming home. I felt lonely as he wouldn't talk about family matters, and at the same time, I started to suspect his private life, so I secretly hired a detective agency. The results were damning. He was repeatedly going on late-night dates and trips with a woman other than the one who had complained about harassment at the company. And so you rate, while I was hurting and struggling with issues regarding Michael's family, he himself was happily spending time with another woman. When I found out, I felt a sense of clarity as my suspicions were confirmed, but at the same time I was overwhelmed with anger and helplessness, and I cried all night long. One of the reasons I felt I couldn't go on when I brought up divorce over the house issue was this. Just before the divorce, I took some of the evidence to a lawyer for consultation. I was claiming alimony for his affair. And all that was a setup. You just wanted the house back, right? What else were you dissatisfied with? Which mouth of yours is saying that now? The evidence I entrusted to the lawyer clearly shows your affair. I'm telling you, that's not true. Should I show you more evidence then? Apart from what I've given to the lawyer, I have more proof of your affair. Why don't you believe me? Because it's the truth. Beef up with my ex-husband, who's pleading innocence ridiculously. I couldn't help but raise my voice. Anyway, I'm really in a bind because I can't pay the mortgage, so I want you to remarry me and come back home. No way, that's out of the question. Please. You're still working, right, Emily? I admit my mistake. You weren't bullying my mom and sister. What? Are you inging that up now? He had previously accused me of attacking his mother and sister and hurled abuse at me under this misunderstanding, just because I was still working. Now he dares to say this. My sister, who got divorced and became unemployed, was probably begging you for money, right? And to protect our household finances. You were refusing her, but then even my mom started blaming you together with my sister. That's right, but realizing it now is too late. I wanted you to understand that back then, who was it that was fooling around with his affair partner while I was suffering because of those people? I'm sorry, all right. I've admitted my mistake. Isn't that enough? Unfortunately, I can no longer trust you. Feeling a strong aversion to my ex-husband, who is now trying to cozy up to me. I desperately wanted to end the call. Please, I can't pay the mortgage without Emily. So you want to get back together with me, just like that. Together with me, just for the money. I can't believe it. Listen, it's not just the affair. I know why you lost your job too. You were hitting on a girl at work, and even after the boss warned you, you didn't stop, did you? You've really hit rock bottom.
That's a misunderstanding. I would never do such a thing.
So even if you hadn't brought up the house issue, I would have suggested the divorce anyway, considering all these things. After I said this, Michael finally fell silent, probably feeling frustrated and unable to find any more words to say. I cut off the call with my hopeless ex-husband, then and there, and blocked his number. Since then, I've been living with my beloved parents and dedicating myself to my work as usual. There were days when the affair and issues with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law affected my ability to concentrate on work, but I love my job and continued to work hard, achieving great results. My hard work was recognized by my superiors, and I received promotions and salary increases. I heard about what happened to Michael afterwards from Sarah. Apparently, he couldn't stay unemployed and tried to get a job, aiming for a fresh start. However, the reason he was fired from his previous job became a major hindrance, and it seems that he wasn't hired anywhere. That's now, he's somehow making ends meet with a low-paying part-time job. There's no way he can pay off the mortgage on a single-family home in such a situation, so it seems that his mother-in-law and sister-in-law had to get part-time jobs as well. His plan to take over the house without paying for it has completely fallen through, and he must be making a sour face right now. And Michael's savings have decreased considerably. He seems to have contributed a significant amount to the woman he had an affair with. On top of the mortgage, he now has to pay alimony to me. Additionally, he's being sued by a female employee from the company he was messing around with. The alimony payments to her are piling up, and I heard that his meager savings were quickly depleted. Right now, they must be working their tails off. All three of them trying not to lose the house while cutting back on their living expenses. I can picture them, worn out from being exploited for minimum wage. Fuller, and especially the sister-in-law, who is desperate to borrow money from me, turned out to have cheated on her husband in the past, although she had told me she had been cheated on and divorced. When that came to light, her husband got fed up and divorced her. She had to pay him alimony and ended up in debt. She was probably planning to use the money she took from me to pay it back. Really, what on earth are those siblings doing? I regret getting involved with such an aimless family, but I'm really glad I could quickly divorce and cut ties with them. Several years later, so with this, the contract is complete. I am currently planning my second home purchase. It's a more comfortable and ideal home for living with my parents than the previous one. Thank you so much. This is much nicer than the previous house, isn't it? Thank you. I'm happy that the three of us could discuss this together. It's a shame that your marriage ended this way. I've already forgotten about that idiot. What's most important to me are my parents who raised me. From now on, I will start a peaceful and happy life with my parents who have always supported me. I'm really looking forward to our new home being built. Today's our honeymoon, right? What do you mean by tearing up my passport? Just as we finished packing and were about to leave, my husband, in what seemed like a crazy move, forcefully tore my passport. His smug face really got on my nerves. I never planned to go with you in the first place. I was obviously going to go with my mom. I had sensed some tension before we got married, but I had no idea the twisted relationship between my husband and my mother-in-law was this deep. I've never heard of anyone's mother-in-law hijacking their honeymoon, at least not in my circle. I was shocked and angry at this unbelievable situation, but above all, I felt really creeped out. I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake choosing him as my partner. Huck says he awed out scissors and began to shred the passport. I looked at my mother-in-law, grinning from ear to ear, and thought I needed to get away from here as fast as possible. I never expected this, but I actually had the perfect evidence to ing these two down. My name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old and have been working for 7 years. I recently got the proposal I'd always dreamed of from my boyfriend of 4 years, and now I'm right in the middle of planning our wedding and honeymoon. I met my husband after I started working. I've always been the low-key type, and although I got my first boyfriend in college, it seems he lost interest in the quiet and not so exciting me, and we just drifted apart. Years passed without me dating anyone seriously until I started working. Ever would I have imagined that out of all my colleagues, I'd be one of the first to get married? I think I was more shocked than anyone. My husband was a senior at my company when I was a newbie, and he always supported me whenever I struggled with unfamiliar tasks at work. The only guy I dated in the past was a classmate, but there's something about someone 5 years older. I found my husband dependable and trustworthy. When he asked me out on our first date, I was over the moon. I still cherish the dolphin figurine we bought during our first date at the aquarium. When he said he wanted to date with marriage in mind, I felt like I was on cloud 9. We went on many dates together and had great time. But now everything has changed. He's on many dates, and he proposed to me at the same aquarium where we had our first date. Can I really be this happy? At night, I was so thrilled that I couldn't sleep, and I still remember that feeling. It's with my head still in the clouds. We quickly decided to visit his parents' home the following week. But it was there that I started feeling uneasy about getting married. My father-in-law was very kind, but my mother-in-law seemed to disapprove of me. She said, "You could have married someone more outstanding than this plain girl." Being told that at our first meeting filled me with doubt and anxiety about our future life together. But everyone feels some pre-wedding jitters, right? So I pretended everything was fine and carried on with the wedding preparations. Piece of kind story. One day, while discussing our life after marriage, both he and his mother just assumed I'd be quitting my job. While I once admired the idea of quitting work after getting married, I didn't see that as an option at this point. Looking back, I think my ongoing anxieties about marriage prevented me from considering leaving the place where I felt most secure, my job. While dodging the persistent suggestions from my mother-in-law to quit, I decided to keep working at the same company, alongside my husband. During our wedding preparations, we disagreed on the timing of our official marriage registration. He was eager to formalize things sooner. In the end, we decided to respect his wishes and registered shortly after that. A procedure felt rather mundane, but realizing that we were now officially married made me so happy. We discussed having a small, intimate wedding. But it seems he mentioned this to his mother, and she called the next day. She said, "Edward's wedding, and you're talking about having a small, intimate ceremony. Please don't just say whatever you want. The wedding needs to be grand. I'll make sure it's fitting for Edward. By the way, please keep your guest list minimal. Just your parents and close friends. Your friends are probably just as dull, right? They'd make the wedding feel so gloomy and ruin everything." I was bombarded with opinions about the venue and the guest list, and it was infuriating that she felt she had the right to dictate so much. But I wanted to avoid conflict with my soon-to-be mother-in-law. I had a ton of things I wanted to say, but I kept telling myself that maybe this is just how weddings go, and I decided to invite only my parents and close friends, as my mother-in-law wanted. But my mother-in-law's meddling didn't stop there. She didn't just interfere with the guest list. She also had opinions about the program, entertainment, decorations, and food. If we did everything as she said, we'd go way over budget. Initially, Edward's family had said they would cover half of the wedding costs, but somehow that changed, and now it was weddings are for the ID, and suddenly we were way over budget. I ended up having to pay for all the extra expenses she wanted. So the wedding ended up being a flashy affair, just as she wanted, far from the simple ceremony I'd imagined. I tried to make some changes behind her back to save on costs, but I ended up getting scolded by her saying, "It looks cheap because you didn't do as I told you." Still, after the wedding was over, I thought I'd finally get some distance from her. But then my husband did the unthinkable. I was fed up with all the interference from her regarding the wedding, and even though my husband knew I wanted to keep my distance from her, he insisted we live with her. Our new place, which we'd already signed a lease for, was canceled without me knowing, and all of my belongings that were supposed to be moved there could only be sent to my husband's family home. I was at a loss for words, shocked by how everything had been decided without consulting me. The wedding planning was entirely left up to me. Even when I told Edward the costs would exceed the budget if we met all of her requests, he pretended not to hear. The anxiety I had even before the ceremony had grown immensely. After our wedding, we had planned to go on a honeymoon AUED. I always wanted to visit this dream destination, and the idea of going there for our honeymoon felt surreal. However, my growing unease with Edward, who by now was acting quite suspiciously, and the thought of living with my mother-in-law when we returned really dampened my spirits. Yet, just like with our wedding preparations, Edward wasn't very cooperative about the honeymoon planning, but strangely, he took the lead in booking the flights and hotels. I assumed he'd chosen a romantic hotel for our honeymoon stay and was excited. As usual, I was left to foot all the bills, but with the pre-wedding euphoria, I was just glad that Edward was helping out even a little. Little did I realize, this was a foreshadowing of a shocking event to come. The wedding wrapped up, and amidst the hustle and bustle, the day of our honeymoon arrived. Despite some unresolved feelings about the wedding and the impending cohabitation, I was determined to switch gears and enjoy the trip with the man I loved. But as I woke up in the middle of the night to prepare in time for our flight, Edward dropped a bombshell as if it was no big deal. "Don't. Sarah, I'm going to go with my mom." "What? What are you talking about? It's our honeymoon. It's not like any other trip. Why would your mother be coming? And besides, we've only paid for two, for the flight tickets and the hotel." Visibly shaken, I tried to understand his logic when Edward dropped another shocker. "I never said I was going on this trip with you, did I? Make me last? Of course I'm going with my mom. A trip with her takes precedence over a honeymoon. it's a gratitude trip for all she's done for us. I was speechless. Gratitude trip for all she's done for me. You stay here and get the house ready by cleaning every nook and cranny. But with that, Edward began to forcibly tear apart my passport I had entrusted to him. I was in disbelief, unable to utter a word, just watching my passport being destroyed. Right then, my fully made-up mother-in-law burst into our room without knocking. "Edward, are you ready?" Seeing her, Edward's face lit up. "Yeah, we're good. Finally, we can go on this trip without any interruptions." They both shared a gleeful laugh, leaving me utterly repulsed. I realized I was about to marry an absolute nightmare. I had been pondering how to get along with my mother-in-law in our upcoming married life, but this was beyond my wildest thoughts. I had made a colossal mistake right from the get-go. I get it now, the kind of people you two are. I couldn't help but speak out, but my words seemed to be nothing more than sour grapes to them as they laughed heartily and left together. I had been so happy that Edward was helping out a bit with our honeymoon. But that was just him preparing to go with his mother. He had willingly taken charge of the flight and hotel bookings because he was booking everything under his mother's name from the start. And he dumped all the costs on me. To the betrayal by my husband hit me hard, but my anger outweighs my sadness. The dreamy, intimate wedding I had always envisioned, and the honeymoon, which was supposed to be the best memory with the one I loved, were both once-in-a-lifetime events. But they were ruined by my mother-in-law and my husband. I can't believe this is happening, I thought, overwhelmed by my situation. At first, I couldn't accept it, but soon after I decided I gotta act fast and get a divorce. Interestingly, I had something that would come in handy for the divorce. Initially, I started recording with the intent of preserving memories of the most significant events of my life, my wedding and honeymoon. Since the wedding preparations, I'd been recording and audio capturing various moments. What began as a pure desire to cherish our wedding memories gradually turned into documenting my mother-in-law's malicious actions and harassment. I often thought of quitting, since I'd probably never watch these recordings again, but it's ironic how useful they turned out to be. Just a few days ago, I had moved in and was still unpacking. Now I began to repack my stuff. Ironically, I hadn't opened much, so packing was done in no time. I wondered if my husband and his mother were at the airport by now. The very thought filled me with an indescribable anger, so I tried not to dwell on it. Even though I'd only been there a few days, I wanted to erase any trace of my presence in that house, so I cleaned thoroughly everywhere I had been. While cleaning the living room, I stumbled upon something shocking. It was evidence that my husband was embezzling money from his company. Given his position in charge of company sales, he was reporting lower earnings to the company and pocketing the difference. And apparently his mother was in on it too. She had meticulously noted the actual sales, the amount pocketed by my husband, and even listed all the luxury bags, clothes, and shoes he had bought for her with that money. It was a significant amount. Wasn't leaving such a diary in plain sight in the living room. I really couldn't fathom what they were thinking. To discovering my husband's misdeeds, I was horrified, realizing the gravity of the situation. For a moment, I wondered if I working at the same company could somehow smooth things over. But then I thought, why should I help someone who ditched me for a honeymoon with his mother? I headed to the company with evidence of embezzlement. That though they were supposed to be on their honeymoon, having both taken paid leave, my colleagues were shocked to see the very person in the office. Everyone was asking, what happened? At you on your honeymoon, no longer feeling the need to hide anything. I told them that my husband and my mother-in-law had gone on the honeymoon instead, that my passport was torn up, and that I had paid for the entire honeymoon. Is my colleagues, superiors, and boss were shocked and angry at my husband for me. I thanked my concerned colleagues and made my way to the executive area of the company. Though I never told anyone, one of the top executives of this company is my uncle. Neither my colleagues nor my husband or my mother-in-law knew this fact. I didn't want people to think I got the job because of connections, so I applied to the company without telling my uncle and secured the position on my own merit. My uncle doesn't handle human resources, so I reached out to him before the orientation and asked him not to reveal our relationship at the company. But though he was surprised, he commended my efforts and promised that we would interact just as any other executive and employee. My uncle doesn't have children, and since I was little, he doted on me as if I were his own child. Till around elementary school, my sisters and I went on several trips with just my uncle. When I was a child, I'd sneakily call my uncle to buy me things I wanted, and I would get scolded by my parents for it. That's how much he adored me. Since joining the company, our work areas have been entirely different, and after idly catching each other's eyes and exchanging smiles during the orientation, we haven't met since. I knocked on my uncle's office, explained the situation to his secretary, and was allowed in. My uncle greeted me with a beaming smile when I visited, but his expression quickly turned somber. Canary.
Why are you here? He asked.
Aren't you supposed to be on your honeymoon? Seeing my dear uncle's familiar, kind face, I was overwhelmed with emotion and burst into tears. Through my sobs, I recounted everything that had happened, and he became visibly enraged, an expression I had never seen on him before. Of course, I told him in detail about my husband's embezzlement and handed over the evidence. My uncle promised to convene a board meeting immediately to address my husband's actions. Then he asked, "What are you gonna do today?" "Head back home." Despite the unbelievable betrayal of having my honeymoon hijacked by my mother-in-law, I felt genuinely grateful knowing there were still warm-hearted people in my life who cared for me. But sure, a week later, when my husband and his mother returned from what was supposed to be our honeymoon, I received an immediate call. My husband was furious that I hadn't picked them up from the airport and hadn't cleaned the house as instructed. He ranted about where I could possibly be. Without even letting my husband speak, I said, "You two are sure loud and annoying. I don't want to hear your voices anymore."
Do you think it's okay for you to say such things?
"I did you a favor by marrying you. If I divorce you, you'll never get remarried. My mom's furious too. If you come back now and prepare our meals, I might forgive you. We're tired of foreign food. Make some tasty traditional meals. He'd never spoken to me like that before our supposed honeymoon. After revealing his scheme with the passport and going on a trip with his mother, his true colors had shown. It dawned on me that I had never truly seen him for who he was. I had been reflecting on this realization over the past few days. I've consulted a lawyer regarding our divorce. Could you please discuss related matters with them? A lawyer? I thought. What are you talking about? I'm not getting a divorce. I could hear his mother in the background, shouting for him to hand her the phone, calling me names. Well, do as you please. By the way, I informed the company about your embezzlement. I think they'll be calling you in soon. Maybe you should get a lawyer too. I could sense his panic on the other end, but it wasn't my problem anymore. He kept calling, so I just blocked his number. My uncle was aware of our honeymoon dates, so right after our call, the company summoned my husband. Using the evidence I provided, they verified the information and confirmed the discrepancies in the payments. It turned out the amount my husband embezzled was enormous. In front of the company's executives, my husband desperately tried to defend himself. He fabricated a story, claiming I was the real embezzler and he had tried to stop me. At that point, my uncle couldn't hold back and shouted, "My niece would never do such a thing. We've confirmed that you and your mother committed the embezzlement. You're lucky we haven't involved the police yet." Realizing the jig was up and that I was related to senior management, my husband looked as if he had lost his soul. That day, I went to the company to return the wedding gifts to my colleagues since our marriage had ended so soon after the wedding. Everyone refused, saying they had given them as a token of their blessings. While I was surrounded by this warmth, my ridiculous husband approached.
Why didn't you tell me you were related to the top bass? I'm sorry, really. Can we start over?
Can you ask your uncle to keep me in the company and make the embezzlement go away? That's good, I said. Do you even understand what you're saying? Are you okay in the head? Divorce is the only option now. Reflect on your actions and face the consequences. Having said that, I pushed him away, but he must not have had anywhere else to turn. He clung on desperately. Watching this, my colleagues called security, who dragged him away. He was fired immediately. Regarding the embezzlement, it seems the company is seeking damages from my husband. After finding out about the whole situation, my mother-in-law repeatedly tried to contact my family. However, once she consulted my sensible father-in-law, the calls stopped. I'd always wondered why my sensible father-in-law had even allowed our honeymoon in the first place, but when he later came to apologize, admitting his mistake, I understood after hearing his side. He believed my mother-in-law was going on a domestic trip with her friends. Then I came home. After hearing about the ridiculous actions of those two, my father-in-law agreed I should return to my parents' home and even helped me pack. At the time, our emotions were high, and without discussing much else, I just went back to my family home. Knowing how genuine, kind, and rational my father-in-law is, I'm sure he would have stopped all this if he had known. He was the only reasonable person I could trust in that house. Although I was the victim, it was incredibly embarrassing to think that my honeymoon had been hijacked by my mother-in-law. I was considering resigning from my job. My parents advised me not to push myself too hard, to push myself to work for a while. However, my uncle mentioned that working might distract you. He discussed it with the CEO, and they arranged for me to be transferred to a launch office. The divorce process with my husband went surprisingly smoothly, thanks to an excellent lawyer. However, I later learned that my father-in-law was involved. When we were planning our wedding and discussing the expenses for the ceremony and honeymoon, it turned out that my husband had virtually no savings. My in-laws were just an average working-class family. Considering how short our marriage was, the alimony was quite substantial. Incredibly, my father-in-law sold the family home to cover it. They saw me returning to the family home on the day I was supposed to be leaving for our honeymoon, luggage in hand. To the neighborhood's resident gossip in the mix, it didn't take long for rumors to spread. The stories grew exaggerated to the point where living in that area became unbearable. Initially, my mother-in-law, who was always concerned about appearances, only approved of our marriage because both my husband and I worked for prominent companies. Having her son and daughter-in-law working for major companies was a status symbol for her. Now, with all the rumors circulating because of her actions, she likely couldn't bear to live in that house. My father-in-law probably also felt responsible for covering the damages from the embezzlement my husband caused. While I have nothing but disdain for both my husband and mother-in-law, I genuinely feel sorry for my father-in-law. After being fired and ordered to pay damages, coupled with me not returning as he hoped, my husband apparently suffered a mental breakdown. Unable to work, he seems to be moping around in a small apartment he moved to. Seeing her beloved son so downcast, my mother-in-law also retreated, becoming reclusive, as my father-in-law told me. In fact, my father-in-law, fed up with my mother-in-law, was considering divorce as he didn't want to spend his later years with her. He asked if I could introduce him to the lawyer I had used. I immediately contacted my uncle, who got in touch with the lawyer. Romance. It might take some time, but I hope my father-in-law can live the life he wishes. Thanks to the intervention of the company's CEO and my uncle, I was transferred to a branch office where I'm surrounded by colleagues and superiors who have been incredibly supportive. I'm eternally grateful to my uncle. The only regret I have is missing out on the country we planned to visit for our honeymoon. Considering everything, once things settle down, I hope to take a relaxed trip awad. The godmother, lying on the bed, seems to be just sleeping. However, her face is drained of blood, looking unnaturally pale, almost like a mannequin. I rush to the bed, sit down, clinging to my mother, and "Mom, Mom," I call out to her, but she doesn't even twitch. She's just eating in a vegetative state. "Mom, why?" I grab her hand, cold as ice, and scream, crying. What a joke. She's just bedridden. And there's no inheritance in sight. Seriously, isn't a mother-in-law such a burden? Taking advantage of my mother's unconsciousness, my other Jake and his wife, Sarah, reveal their true colors. I will never forgive them. Doing such a thing to my beloved mother. However, an unexpected development awaited me after this. My name is Emily. I'm 21 years old. Living alone while attending a national university, focusing on education. I am busy every day with student teaching and studying for exams, all to fulfill my childhood dream of becoming a high school teacher. Combining this with my desire to repay my mother, who raised my other Jake and me by herself, I spare no effort to achieve my dream. My mother, who's been desperately supporting our family ever since my father passed away when I was young, especially had a hard time with my other Jake. A few years ago, Jake dropped out of high school and began to live a life of idleness, rarely working and mostly fooling around. Stealing money from my and my mother's wallets was a daily occurrence, and sometimes he even went so far as to secretly sell our household appliances when he needed more. "Hey Jake, did you take Mom's money again without asking?" "Give it back," I say. "Son, you got any proof? You're accusing me without any reason. Show me the evidence." Every time something happened, Jake would violently argue back, demanding show me the evidence. And when we couldn't, he would get so violent that we couldn't handle him. However, even when we actually had evidence, my mother and I were too afraid of Jake's violent outbursts to do anything. One day, when I was fed up with Jake's behavior, the phone rang throughout the house. My mother, who was cooking dinner in the kitchen, frantically picked up the receiver. "Hello?" I could hear my mother's usual cheerful response. At that time, I was a middle school student doing my homework in my room and didn't pay much attention. However, just a few seconds later, something happened. "Oh my!" she exclaimed, followed by "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." My mother continued to apologize. Feeling a sense of unease, I confirmed that the phone call had ended and rushed to my mother's side. "Mom, what happened?" Then my mother slowly turned around and said with a pale face, "Jake, he got a married woman pregnant." Jake had gotten involved with a married woman he met while out fooling around. That woman was Sarah, who is now Jake's wife. From that point on, hellish days began. Although Sarah's ex-husband demanded alimony, Jake wasn't working, so all the financial responsibilities fell on my mother's shoulders. We were forced to live even more frugally than before. Furthermore, the eyes of our neighbors became even harsher. Rumors spread quickly, and my mother and I were bad-mouthed every day. "It's that girl, the one in the rumors, just like her other, isn't she also a playgirl? Is there something wrong with her mother's parenting? Being a single parent must be really tough." At school, and at work, my mom were faced with curious eyes every day. And unable to talk back, we just had to endure the behind-the-back talks. Those days were nothing short of hell. Weeks later, my mom and I learned through a lawyer that Sarah and her ex-husband had divorced. And after that, it seemed like my other had become defiant. He started ending Sarah home frequently. Moreover, despite being pregnant, Sarah and my other drank a lot of alcohol and even smoked. "My son, don't you think it's harmful for Sarah since she's pregnant?" My mother always worried like that, but they never listened to her advice. In the end, Sarah had a miscarriage, and the judgment from those around us grew even harsher. I heard they said his son forced that woman to have an abortion. He was violent. That's why she miscarried, because he hit her in the wrong place. Baseless rumors spread more and more. Even though my mom and I hadn't done anything wrong, I wondered why we had to feel so miserable. Pieces in the end, unable to bear the judgment from the neighbors, my mom and I decided to move back to her hometown. But my other didn't come with us. I'm gonna marry Sarah. You guys, once I can't squeeze any more money out of you, you're useless to me. Spitting out those words, my other cut off all ties with us. Honestly, I was nervous that my other might cause trouble even after we moved. So when we finally got away from him, my mom and I cried tears of joy. From that point on, my relationship with my other was almost like a complete estrangement. Life in the new place was still tight financially, but my mom and I lived quietly, just the two of us. When I became a high school student, I decided to work right after graduation and submitted my career survey accordingly. Having seen my mom's struggles up close, I wanted to give her an easier life as soon as possible. Of course, without going to college, I wouldn't be able to fulfill my dream of becoming a high school English teacher. But at that time, that seemed like a minor issue to me. I thought my decision to work right away would surely make my mom happy. But when she saw my career survey, she looked serious and said, "Emily, go to college. You've always said you wanted to be an English teacher. I want you to go to college and fulfill your dream. Don't worry about the money. Children shouldn't have to worry about that." But with those words, she strongly encouraged me. Mom, thank you. After that, I aimed for a local state university with affordable tuition and studied hard every day. And in the fall, thanks to my efforts, I was able to get into my first choice university. However, the university I got into was far from home, and it took more than an hour one way. It was time-consuming and costly, but we couldn't afford for me to live alone. Above all, I didn't want my mom to be lonely if I left home. Seeing my concern, my mom said, "You know, the time you have to yourself is precious, and you only get it while you're a student, so make sure you use it wisely." Urged by her, I've been living in an apartment near the university since I enrolled. I'm deeply grateful to my mom for letting me go to college and even supporting me to live on my own. I'm determined to fulfill my dream as soon as possible and give my mom an easier life. With that strong feeling in my heart, I've been diligently studying every day. Then one day, after the usual university lectures, I came home and saw a missed call from my mom on my phone. "Hello, Mom? I just got home. What's up? I'm Crossfix."
Oh, Emily, I'm sorry to call you out of the blue. There's something I need to talk to you about. Her tone was lower than usual.
And I instinctively aced myself. "And, Ian, what's up?" After a pause, she slowly said, "I'm going to start living with your other, with Jake." I couldn't comprehend what she was saying and fell silent. Actually, I heard from Jake a little while ago. He's living with Sarah now, in the same state as us. They asked me if I wanted to move in and live with them. She said, "Wait a minute. Mom, you're kidding, right? After all the painful things those two have put us through." I didn't realize it, but I had raised my voice in my emotional state. "It's not that I've forgotten, but Jake says he's sorry. He wants to make amends for what happened back then, she explained. Now, of all times, there's definitely something fishy going on. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine. Besides, I want to give Jake one more chance to make things right. Sarah actually regretted having a miscarriage with Jake's child and said she's changed her heart. But still, there's no need to live together. Only Jake would just stay out of our lives. Then, with a determined voice, my mother said, I haven't told Emily this, but the truth is, I've been unwell. Jake happened to see me visiting your uncle's hospital, and he was concerned, so he suggested we live together. I had no idea that my mother was in poor health, and I hadn't noticed any changes. Even though we lived apart, we made sure to see each other at least once a month. Is it a serious illness? No, it's probably just my age, she said with a slight chuckle, trying to make light of the situation. I felt so worthless for wanting to repay my mother for everything she's done, yet not noticing any changes in her health. Moreover, even my uncle, a doctor at a university hospital, had kept it from me. They probably thought it would be a burden to me, a student. I was so shocked that I couldn't rely on them, and I couldn't speak. If my mother's health was indeed deteriorating, living alone was indeed worrisome. And once my mother has made up her mind, she won't change it. No matter what I said, it probably wouldn't change her mind. I gave up halfway and sighed softly. All right, but you have to promise to consult with me immediately if anything happens. You have to. Yes, I promise. And so the living arrangement with my mother, Jake, and Sarah began. It had been about a month since my mother, Jake, and Sarah started living together. I was in the middle of a busy semester at university, spending my entire day studying. Professionally, several employees at my part-time job had quit, so I was extremely busy juggling school and work. I hadn't met Jake and Sarah yet. I wanted to meet them before they started living with my mother, but seeing how busy I was, my mother insisted, don't push yourself. She frequently contacted me, telling me how kind Jake and Sarah had become. Jake has really changed. He even bought me a cake on his way home from work the other day. Sarah is really good at household chores. She insists that I don't have to do anything. I feel like I'm taking advantage of them. Every time I heard my mother's happy voice, I felt relieved. I still couldn't forgive my other Jake, but no matter what kind of person he was still her child. Maybe she's just happy to rebuild her relationship with her son after a falling out. If my mother is happy, then that's all that matters, I thought, starting to accept their living arrangement. Just one day, I contacted my mother and she suggested, let's have lunch at that cafe we used to go to all the time. I was looking forward to that day, but on the day of our meeting, something unexpected happened. I arrived at the cafe for our meetup and looked for my mother, who had arrived earlier. I scanned the interior of the koyari, but couldn't find anyone who looked like her. Then I saw a woman waving at me from a seat in the back of the cafe. Mom, I was about to wave back when I froze. The mother sitting there was shockingly thinner than she had been just 3 months ago. What happened, Mom? Her shoulders were noticeably narrower, and her cheeks were hollow. Long time no see, Emily. How have you been? Never mind about me. What happened to you? You've lost so much weight." I grabbed my mother's shoulder and questioned her. Suddenly grasping her shoulder, I was shocked at how thin it was, worried it might just eat. Actually, a little while ago, Jake and Sarah's attitudes started changing. At first, they just pushed the household chores onto me, but gradually they began reducing the amount of food they gave me. I've been moving around without eating, so I've lost a bit of weight. My mother said with a downcast smile. Seeing my mother's drastically changed appearance, sadness welled up inside me. But even more than that, anger and hatred towards my other and his wife surged within me. I couldn't forgive them. Is Jake trying to steal our mom's happiness again? I asked. See Jake and Sarah right now. I'll talk to them directly. Why don't you come live with me? I'll work more hours, so don't worry about anything. My mother gently placed her index finger on my mouth, stopping my emotional outburst. Emily, it's okay. I'm all right, so I just need you to wait another week, she said in an unusually calm tone, which made me involuntarily close my mouth. In the end, I couldn't meet with Jake and Sarah that day. Yet the clear anger towards them inside me did not subside. I returned home alone, and without turning on the light in my room, I collapsed onto my bed and okayed down in tears. Why? Why can't I ever be of any help to Mom, I thought. Surely my mom is worried about me because I'm a student and can't move as freely as I'd like. But more than anything, I was just furious with myself for being so powerless and not being able to help my mom. Exactly 1 week later, something happened. I returned home from school. I returned home from university as usual and was about to start preparing dinner when I received a call from an unknown number.
Hello, Emily. Is that you?
It was my uncle's voice. Uncle, is this your number? Are you calling from a hospital?
Ekta's ignoring my question. My uncle said in a quiet voice, "Stay calm and listen to me. Your mom has been in a traffic accident."
The moment I heard those words, I felt as if time had stopped. Mom, in an accident? I asked, my voice unmistakably shaking. Uncle, you're kidding, right? Actually, today was your mom's day to go to the hospital. She must have been feeling unwell. She stumbled onto a crosswalk at a red light. She's been diagnosed with malnutrition recently, and that must have affected her. Then a car hit her. Fortunately, her life is not in danger, but she hasn't regained consciousness. No, that can't be, I said, my voice trembling. Anyway, she's now at my university hospital. She might not wake up again. The trembling hands, I hung up the phone. Patting my bag that had fallen on the floor, I rushed out of the house. Mom, please be okay, I muttered to myself as I ran. When I arrived at the hospital, my uncle, who was waiting at the entrance, immediately took me to her room. My emaciated mother was lying on the bed, seemingly just asleep. But her face was pale as if drained of blood, looking almost like a mannequin. I rushed to the bed, sat down, and clung to her. Mom, I called out, my voice choked with emotion. No matter how loudly I called out to her, she didn't move a muscle. She was in a vegetative state, only eating. Mom, why? I cried, holding her ice-cold hand. Then I heard the sound of the hospital room door sliding open and footsteps entering the room. At the same time, I heard two familiar voices that reached my ears. What's this? Just a bedridden patient and no inheritance. Now she's just a burden. Really, though? I was hoping the inheritance would come through quickly. Mother-in-law, isn't this too much trouble? The voices I heard right behind me belonged to my other Jake and his wife Sarah. I'd heard their voices more than enough when I lived with my other. It was the voice of my other, who used to steal money from me and our mom and then go on a rampage. That was the voice of Sarah, who didn't care about me and my mom at all, made a baby with my other, and even had the nerve to move into our house. But into our house, I could never forget. I was visiting Uncle at the hospital and I heard that Mom's not gonna last much longer. I was nice to her, thinking the inheritance was coming, and now she's in a vegetative state, repaying kindness with ingratitude. I thought mother-in-law had hidden my father-in-law's inheritance, so I was excited, thinking a big sum might come our way. Think what a letdown. We were just wasting our kindness. Even Uncle couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "Hey, show some respect." Inheritance. We don't need to be talking about that right now. And to begin with, Mom started getting shaky because you guys skipped her meals. She might have had an accident because of that. You deceived Mom out of greed for the inheritance. When I turned around, they were Jake, who seemed a bit aged, and Sarah, with her flashy curly hair and a short skirt. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't notice anything. I glared sharply at my other and his wife, who were laughing scornfully. Everything is a mess because of you. Always has been, always will be. Ever show your faces to us again. My other and his wife shuddered as I yelled at them with a ferocious look. I got it. There's no point in staying here with Mom anymore. It's just costing money. We were after the inheritance from the start. If there's no money coming in, there's no point in living with her. In his panic, Jake spoke in an unusually loud voice. Even before we got married, I lived with Mom and Emily to steal their money. Didn't notice, naive as she is. I've been stealing money from Mom's purse even now. And I've sold almost all of her expensive-looking jewelry, but she hasn't noticed a thing. By the way, Emily, you left your mom alone, too. Aren't you just as guilty? Don't push everything onto us. It's in front of our silent mother. Jake and Sarah were laughing scornfully. I was so frustrated, I couldn't hold back my tears. And then, at that moment, hey, you finally said it. Why? Jake, Sarah, and I all spoke at the same time. Ups on the bed, my mother was sitting up with her eyes wide open. I coined, Mom, what? I'm sorry, Emily. You don't have to cry anymore. You did well. My mother smiled energetically and exchanged glances with Uncle. What do you mean? Mom, weren't you in a car accident and unconscious? Actually, this was all a plan that your uncle and I came up with. Then Uncle, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Sorry, Emily. About 3 months ago, Jake contacted me after he happened to see Mom going to the hospital. He was asking all sorts of strange questions like, is Mom okay? Is Mom not going to last much longer? How much of the inheritance will go to the son? I knew something was up, so I talked to your mom right away. Mom nodded in agreement to Uncle's words. Right after Jake talked to me, he suggested we live together. I knew right away he was after my inheritance, so I asked your uncle to pretend to be on Jake's side and find out what he was planning. The sudden turn of events left me stunned, my mouth hanging open. While Jake and Sarah were furious, realizing they had been tricked. Huh, you were in touch with Mom? You tricked me. You guys are the worst. You deceived both me and Jake, didn't you? Cowards. Thanks for the advice, it came in handy after all these years. Gips, my other and his wife collapsed to their knees. No way. Exfesses, ignoring my other and his wife clinging to her. Mom gave Emily and me a triumphant smile and exchanged eye contact with our uncle. That night, I had dinner with Mom at our uncle's house. Why didn't you tell me about the plan? A tickmate, now that I had finally calmed down and grasped the situation. I asked Mom and Uncle. My eyes were still swollen from crying so much.
I'm sorry for surprising you, but to deceive the enemy, one must first deceive their friends. While it's true that Jake was starving us, I also ate as little as possible to make our act more convincing. I'm quite the actress, aren't I? But you were really going to the hospital, right? Is your health, your illness okay? Jake said that you didn't have much longer to live.
Is that true? As I asked teary-eyed then, Mom and Uncle looked at each other and burst into laughter. Oh dear, the hospital I was going to was the orthopedic department at the university hospital. I had terrible back pain, and my other recommended a good doctor there. After about a month of visits, I was completely healed. Ick only saw his sister going into the hospital, so he didn't know which department she was visiting. As for saying she didn't have long to live, we did tell a little white lie. Recently, we've had her come to the hospital for the sake of camouflage and information exchange. Hearing their nonchalant answers, all the tension left my body. Mom wasn't sick. She would be with us for a long time to come. I'm so relieved. I haven't been able to repay you for everything yet, Mom. Bereaved, I okayed down and started crying again. Today my tear ducts seem to be on overdrive. I'm sorry for putting you through this, Emily, but all I want is for you to be happy and healthy.
She hugged me tenderly as I cried like a child.
Later on, Mom and Uncle submitted the voice recorder to the police. Since they had already consulted a lawyer, it seemed that we were going to get all of the stolen money and the money from the sold jewelry back from my other and his wife. Of course, we made them pay everything in one lump sum. By the way, my other and his wife, who had quit their jobs and were living off a huge debt while waiting for an inheritance, would now be chased for repayments on that debt as well. Moreover, it turned out they had been involved in setting up honey traps and fraudulent schemes. Hooked, once they became targets of a police investigation, they were quickly caught. Geeksen, I have no idea what kind of life my other and his wife have been leading. A few months later, as the weather gradually warmed up, I was enjoying my peaceful days when I got a call from Mom. She said, Emily, after the university graduation ceremony next week, do you want to go out to eat with Uncle and the three of us? I said, hey, I'm happy, but is it really okay? She replied, it's fine. He said he wants to salute with us. She added, after all, Emily, you're going to be a high school teacher starting this fall, something you've always wanted. I said, yeah. I am happy, thank you. And so, once again, happy everyday life returned to us. But true from now on, I intend to slowly repay the favor, supporting each other with my mother. One day, I called Kyle at the end of every month to confirm the transfer. His Turkation, being a boy, I thought he might find it annoying if I contacted him too often. But still, I wanted to hear his cheerful voice at least once a month. He said, "Thanks for the $15 allowance every month. I've been eating ramen noodles every day." I was surprised and said, "What?" "I've been transferring $1,500 to you every month." We were both puzzled by what the other had said. According to the bank statement I had in my hand, I had indeed transferred $1,500 to Kyle's account as usual. So why did he think it was only a tenth of that amount? $15 isn't enough for anything.
But Mom, is your company going through tough times right now?
I was surprised and asked, "What are you talking about?" "This year we're doing better than ever. I've even been thinking about increasing the amount I send you."
Yeah?
I wondered who had told Kyle that my company was in jeopardy. As I pressed him to find out where he heard such a thing, I could feel my temper rising. I said, "Kyle, I'll definitely take care of it. Don't worry." I hung up the phone, planning to head to Kyle's place. I was going to pick him up and then go to the police. I was sure the culprit was that guy. I won't forgive him. My name is Monica. To the Byromite 49-year-old single mother. I divorced my husband when I was pregnant. Since then, I've been raising Kyle on my own with just a woman's hand. Fortunately, my family's business allowed me to work and study hard to take over. It's to that, our lives were stable and Kyle never had to suffer just because he had one parent. Kyle has always been a very serious child. Although a bit absent-minded at times, his grades have always been at the top. When my father fell ill during Kyle's elementary school days, it motivated him to study hard with the goal of becoming a doctor. He succeeded elegantly, entering a prestigious university's medical school. Medical school was at the top of his class. I had planned to fully support his university expenses, but Kyle worked hard enough to earn a tuition waiver, which was a financial relief. I was so proud to have raised a son who worked hard and achieved results. The university was about a 2-hour train ride from our home, and since it would be too much for him to commute and study, I decided to use the money saved from the tuition to let him live near the university. Fortunately, there was a student dormitory available, so we signed the contract. At Educations, it was inhabited by students from various universities, and Kyle was looking forward to moving in. The dormitory had a rule that even parents couldn't enter, and moving was assisted by other residents as a way to build community. The manager told us not to worry about it. I felt a bit sad not being able to see his room, but I thought it was part of becoming independent and accepted it. For a few days after he started living on his own, Kyle contacted me regularly. However, after about a week, his messages became less frequent, and after a month, I hardly received any replies. He must have been busy with a lot of things since he just started university and wouldn't have much time to contact me. Oh, news is good news. They say, so I assumed he would get in touch if something came up. With that in mind, I decided to wait and see. It was about a week before the summer eek when Kyle finally got in touch. He talked excitedly about how much he enjoyed his classes, that he started a part-time job, and that he was busy every day, and that he planned to come home for the summer holidays. Here's that hearing Kyle's lively voice. I let out a sigh of relief. And Kyle asked if he could bring a friend along when he came home for the holidays. Apparently, the boy from the same dormitory had no one at home during the holidays and planned to stay by himself, so Kyle invited him to come over. Considering Kyle has always been a bit shy, it must mean they really hit it off for him to invite someone over. I agreed without hesitation. Hello.
Are you Kyle's mom? Are you so pretty? He must be popular.
Well, maybe.
Ignoring my discomfort, the friend David made himself at home and sat down on the living room sofa.
During just 3-day stay, David was ordering Kyle around with this and that. It made me anxious, but Kyle didn't seem to mind too much. Hey Kyle, let's hit up the arcade. But there's no arcade around here. That's lame. If he was bored, he could just go home. But true, over these 3 days, I grew to dislike David quite a bit because he was always clinging to Kyle, and I couldn't get any time with my son. He was disrupting our precious family time, and frankly, I wished he would just go home. Just in the end, David didn't just stay for 3 days. He stayed until Kyle left, and I didn't get any time with Kyle at all. After they returned to the dormitory, Kyle's calls became sporadic. Still, I received a thank you for the money and an IEEF update on his life once a month, so I believed he would be all right since he was almost an adult. At come fall, I got a call from Kyle mid-month, which was unusual. Sorry, I've been a bit busy and can't work my part-time job. I can't make rent. Could you send me some money? Is it because of exams? But I'm not thrilled about you overspending. I'll send it this time, but be careful from now on.
When I said that, Kai replied, "If they dispirited, I'm really sorry."
Patrons, it was unlike Kyle to run into money trouble, so I had a feeling David might be involved. Hey, is there something you're struggling with right now? I'm fine. Thanks for everything. Don't overdo it. Oh, right. Got it. Kyle's lack of energy in his voice concerned me, but I thought he must be feeling down because it was the first time he had money problems. Then at the end of the next month, I called Kyle. Kyle, I've put this month's living expenses into your account. Don't waste it, okay? I always called him at the end of the month to confirm the transfer. I figured calling a young man too often might be annoying, but I still wanted to hear his cheerful voice at least once a month.
Thanks for the $150 each month. I'm eating ramen noodles every day.
What? I've been transferring $15,000 every month.
Yeah?
We both were puzzled by what the other had said. According to my bank book, I had been transferring the usual $15,000 into Kyle's account. So why did he think he was only receiving 1/10 of that? But Mom, isn't your company having a tough time? What are you talking about? This year's been our best yet, as I was actually thinking of increasing the amount I send you.
Responded. with he surprised us to my words.
Where on earth did you hear that my company was in trouble? I managed to find out who said it, and it made my blood boil. Kyle, I swear your mom is going to sort this out. I hung up the phone, intent on heading to Kyle's place. Once I pick Kyle up, I plan on going to the police station. A culprit is definitely that guy. Definitely that guy. I won't forgive him. I took a cab from the nearest station and stopped near the student dorms. Then I called Kyle and told him to sneak out, making sure no one sees him. He seemed unconvinced, but he kept his promise and snuck out of the dorm. As he turned the corner and approached the car, I nearly screamed, "Mom, it's been a while. Kyle, what happened to you? That's your body?" It's as if a dam had burst. It turns out we've had similar complaints from this student dorm area lately. Really? According to the police officer, in the last month, there have been about 3 families who have come with complaints similar to ours. And all of them unanimously pointed to a person named David as the culprit. Is the person you're talking about by any chance David? I asked, and the police officer sighed and nodded. Kyle was looking down beside me. He probably suspected it, but really hoped it wasn't true. I put my hand on Kyle's back and looked at the police officer. Is there an ongoing investigation? After a moment of thought, the police officer took Kyle and me to a separate room. He asked us to file a complaint. Of course, I agreed and immediately filled out the complaint form. After submitting it, an officer sat down with us and explained the current status of the investigation. David was like the contact person, getting close to the victims to obtain their account and PIN numbers to withdraw the funds. And it seems that they are currently investigating whether a certain man is the one receiving the stolen money. I stood up in shock when I saw the photo they presented. I know this man. Excuse me. Even the police seemed surprised, their eyes wide as they looked over at us. I took a deep breath to calm my pounding heart. Then I began to talk about the man in the picture. That's John Miller, right? He's my ex-husband and Kyle's father. Wait, my dad? Yes, the man in the photo was John, my former husband. The reason for our divorce was a mix of financial issues and affairs. After the divorce, I lost touch with him and never received child support. I thought it better that Kyle not meet him and be influenced negatively, so I never followed up on John's whereabouts. But I never imagined he'd be involved in a police matter. I felt a chill run through me. Basically, Kyle had been scammed by both an important friend and his biological father. Kyle was so shocked that he just stood there with his mouth open. Actually, we found out that John and David are father and son as well. David had told me before that he was the same age as Kyle. Kyle's dorm does thorough eye checks, so that was probably true. But if that's the case, it means that John had another woman pregnant at the same time as me. Fiction, I no longer have any feelings for John, and though it's after the fact, it was still a shock. Are you saying David and I are others? Kyle seemed unable to comprehend this astonishing revelation. I was at a loss for words in the face of this unexpected fact. So, I'm sorry, but we need a bit of your cooperation. Of course, I won't hesitate to help catch those two. Kyle gave a small nod in agreement with my words. Following the police's instructions, we decided to take the necessary actions. I sneakily returned Kyle to the dorm and stayed at a nearby hotel. The next day, I waited for the right moment when David was around and called. "Hey's Kyle doing all right?" And claiming that Kyle was busy washing dishes, I deliberately put the call on speakerphone. From this action, I gathered that David must be nearby. "I've come into a bit of unexpected money, so I'll transfer it to your account. But make sure to use it wisely,"
I didn't, thanks.
Kyle said and hung up the phone. I stopped the voice recorder I had on hand. Then I transferred $10,000 to an account under Kyle's name. The next morning, Kyle checked his online banking and sent the proof to the police. After stopping by a certain place, I went to the dorm with the police. I explained the situation to the dorm manager, who immediately took us to David's room. When I pressed the bell, annoying footsteps approached from inside. "Who isn't? Wait, what?" David opened the door iskly and froze. He didn't understand why Kyle's mother and the police were standing together in a place where outsiders were not allowed. David seemed genuinely clueless. I put on a smile for the confused David. "Long time no see, David. I'm Kyle's mom."
What do you want with me, Kyle's mom? Oh, and you at the cops?
David looked at Kyle beside me and guessed what we were there for. "We have a warrant and are going to conduct a search now." "I'm really sorry. I have to go out. Can we do this another time?"
BCM without skipping a beat. In response to the police officer's words, David tried to forcefully shut the door. But the police weren't about to let that happen. Two men managed to open David's apartment door and started their search.
Soon after the search began, there were calls from all around. We found something.
Hearing this, David seemed to slump his shoulders in resignation.
Leaving David behind, Kyle and I entered the room. Out on the table, there were several passbooks and cards, all laid out. Each one was for an account under a different name. Looking at them, my head started to hurt. That the cops, with practiced hands, sorted them by name and began snapping photos. How did this get out?
Does he rat me out?
You must have been laughing at me on the inside while I was going through tough times. It's not what it looks like. There's an explanation for all this. David tried to come up with all sorts of excuses to escape blame, but Kyle didn't react at all. Agitated by Kyle's attitude, David looked as if he was about to grab him at any moment. That's when I intervened. That's when I opened my mouth, swindling money from your own half other that's just the lowest of the low. Half other who's related to whom. You and Kyle were frozen by my words. David stood still, given that he had limited his targets to students. It seems certain that he had shared the preliminary investigation information with John because of my family's unique business. But when John did some digging on Kyle, he would have quickly realized that he's my son.
No way.
John Miller is my ex-husband and Kyle's biological father. It seems he was having an affair at the same time, though, and that's when you were born. As I said this, David sat down in shock. Like from the police investigation, I knew that David had a sickly sister. After divorcing me, John immediately married his then-mistress. However, it seems the mistress did not want a boy, so David was neglected and raised haphazardly. As soon as the sister was born, John and the mistress divorced. But the sister, being expensive to treat, was taken in by her maternal side, and it seemed David was taken in by John. They met as siblings from time to time, and during those meetings, David had been giving money to his mother for medical expenses. Upon learning this, I felt the significant presence that the concept of siblings held for David. And it seemed my hunch was correct. I've been exploiting my own siblings. At those final words, David was taken away by the police. You and Kyle just went to the police station and were shown only the parts of the confiscated passbooks that concerned you. It turns out David had been getting people drunk or accompanying them shopping, and when stopping at the ATM, he would take note of the pins. Later, he would visit their rooms and take the passbooks, cards, and even IDs. The reason he had come back home with Kyle during the holiday was to check if my family was wealthy. He would then create new accounts, hand them over to the victims, and whenever money was deposited into their original accounts, he would withdraw everything, only to deposit a little back into the new ones. No wonder I couldn't figure out what I had spent my money on when I updated my passbook. Now it all made sense, and I sighed. It didn't take long for David to name John as an accomplice, and by the next evening, John too had been apprehended. You went to the police and shared everything about John's background with them. A little while later, you went to visit John. Kyle wanted to come, but you asked to go alone this time and had him wait outside. John, whom you hadn't seen in 20 years, had aged, but his attitude of looking down on others was still there. Man, I've really done it this time. Got too carried away, I guess. Without a hint of remorse, that's what John said, and you couldn't hold back your anger. Hold back my anger, but yelling now would just wash away all the effort I've put in so far. I forced a smile. Pathetic, aren't you? Lost it all on the horses, but hey, I'll just call my folks after ages and get out of here soon. John replied casually, as if making small talk. I slapped a piece of paper in front of him. His smug look changed instantly. "Kay, what the heck is this?" "Oh, that. I told your parents everything about you. I'd say you have to her in steep is a disownment letter." John lunged at me from behind the glass. I calmly replied, "You wouldn't understand their hardships, would you? They've been putting off seeing their own grandson, Kyle, because of your mess. You should have let me see him." Raising my voice, a cop in the room told me to calm down. I took a deep breath to settle down. "Anyway, this means I can finally show your mother her grandson." "Oh, and about David?" "What about David?" "He's got nothing to do with you. Says he doesn't want anything to do with a father who'd exploit his own kids." "Your mom said she'd take him in." "You're kidding? Without him, how am I supposed to live?" John sounded so pitiful that I just had to laugh. "Well, maybe you should start working and pay off your alimony." "Monica, come on, we go way back, right?" "Cult me out. How funny. It's whatever we had ended 20 years ago." I answered with the biggest smile of the day, and John looked utterly hopeless. Feeling a wave of relief, I walked out of the visiting room without looking back. Thought John's other crimes came to light, and he got a prison sentence. He won't be out for at least 5 years, giving us all some peace of mind. David, being a minor, ended up on probation. He's apparently being re-educated under the strict guidance of his foster parents now. Their home is even deeper in the boondocks than ours, with absolutely no form of entertainment, so it seems David's having a tough time. By the way, his sister is planning to undergo surgery AOE, and the money David was desperately gathering was for that purpose. However, it turned out that John had been embezzling those funds. David seems like he's still at an age where he'd want to enjoy himself, but each time he gets a talking to from his foster parents. Kyle was initially confused, but he's buckled down and is studying hard to become a doctor, which was his original goal. He's been moving up in school and is about to face the national board exam soon. As for me, my company has grown even more, and I've been able to increase the financial support I give to Kyle. On top of that, someone who's been with the company through thick and thin, and who Kyle has been fond of since he was a kid, has unexpectedly proposed to me, and I'm currently holding off on answer. It was Kyle who suggested that this person should propose, saying, "You might as well marry rather than just date." I was a bit impressed. He knows me so well. Nevertheless, with Kyle's clinical rotations and exams coming up next year, the expenses will surely increase. I'm thinking that I should first support Kyle in becoming a fine doctor before I start considering my own future. "I can't do it, John. That's impossible." Mary's words stopped me in my tracks. Sure enough, I had heard John. Wait, is she talking to my husband? But no, John is on a business trip. It's hard to believe he'd call Mary from there. Yet I continued to hear Mary's voice saying, "John, that's why I can't." Then the next voice I heard left me stunned. "Swap his medicine with that one." I only caught that one sentence, but it was unmistakably John's voice. "Sorry, Amy. The truth is, the next day, Mary confessed something to me, and at the same time, I felt shocked. I was resolved. I must protect Mary no matter what. And John, you're the only one I'll never forgive. I'm Amy Johnson, a 55-year-old homemaker. Just the other day, my only son, Mike, got married and I was feeling relieved. Mike had gotten a job a long time ago and moved out to become independent, but with this marriage, I finally felt the weight off my shoulders. My husband of the same age, John, and I were laughing, saying, now we've got to start thinking about our golden years. Originally, Mike lived alone in an apartment just a 5-minute drive from our house. It was a studio. So after the wedding, the newlywed couple moved to a bigger apartment. This new place was even closer to us, about a 10-minute walk. As John and Mike would say, it's comforting to be close. But it made me a bit anxious. Being close means you have to be careful not to overstep your boundaries. I once received a piece of advice from a friend. I'm rounding up to 60. At this age, most of my friends are in the same boat, becoming mothers-in-law. And from them, I got all sorts of useful advice. What shocked me the most was something about a daughter-in-law. People have two sides, you know. Just because she's smiling on the outside doesn't mean she's having fun. My friend said this with a serious face. Essentially, don't be fooled by just the facade of a daughter-in-law. It might be a twisted thought. who would want to doubt the feelings behind a daughter-in-law's smile. But my friend's words had weight. In fact, this friend got along well with her daughter-in-law. Seeing her frequently, she's like a real daughter to me, she would always say. However, it turned out the daughter-in-law had been forcing herself to get along. It takes one day, all the pent-up frustrations burst out, and the daughter-in-law had a eke down. They were on the verge of cutting ties, but somehow things calmed down. No matter how you slice it, they're still outsiders. It's really about keeping the right distance. I've learned that the hard way. Oaks, I can still recall the exhausted sigh of my friend, the sadness in her voice lingering in my memory. Mary, the girl who married my son Mike, is such a sweetheart. Just always smiling, a great listener, genuinely adorable. I was almost surprised she agreed to marry Mike. Even after they moved, when John and I dropped by their apartment, Mary welcomed us with that same smile, adding a feel free to come over anytime. I'd like to believe there's no deceit in her words and smiles. To take everything she says at face value and to impose on her hospitality would be risky. It's that kind of consideration that's necessary for a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law to get along well. But by being mindful in this way, we've managed to build a good relationship. We only meet when invited by Mike and his wife. Unless there's a specific reason, we don't initiate contact. It feels a bit lonely, but thanks to this, we've been getting by without any issues. Then one day, something unexpected happened when Mike and Mary came over for a visit. What did you say? Uncalices. I had to ask again, to which Mike repeated what he'd said earlier. So I've been assigned an overseas post, and we'd like Mary to stay with you. Mike has traveled AUAID for work before, but this was the first time he was being stationed overseas. Turns out the assignment would last at least 2 years. This with a chance of extension. 2 years is a long time. Isn't it safe for a couple to be apart like that? Wouldn't it be better if Mary went with you? This Mary's got her job, and I'll be too busy overseas to be around much. It's more reassuring for her to live with you guys than alone in a strange place. Right, Mary? When Mike sought confirmation, Mary nodded with a smile. Yes, we didn't mind. If we could support our eldest son and his wife, we would be glad to. But did Mary really want this? Reason might she not prefer to go awad with Mike, even if it meant being in a strange place, rather than living with us, her in-laws? And if Mary's parents were around, perhaps she could have turned to them, but sadly, both had already passed away. But she could just continue living on her own, right? The apartment is close by, and of course we'd be happy to help out if needed. I thought it would be better for Mary to live independently. That's what I suggested to the young couple. But for some reason, Mary immediately said, "That won't work." What do you mean it won't work? Well, it's just that. Mary hesitated. Luxex Pamri istuit Make then spoke for her. Mary has some past traumas and she can't live alone because of them. Well, we didn't know, sorry about that. No, it's okay. If that was the case, living with us might be the only option.
If that's the case, she should stay with us, don't hesitate. She's like her own daughter now, plus I'm often out late for work. It's better for Amy not to be alone. Mary being there would be comforting.
I found myself on guard. But just like John had said, there were benefits to living together. It wasn't all downsides. And unlike me, a homemaker, Mary has her job. We wouldn't be together all the time. Maybe we could make it work. Thank you. We really appreciate it. The pleasure is ours. And so it was settled that Mary would live with us. As I was nervous about living together at first, but Mary turned out to be just as wonderful as ever. Good morning, Mom. If you'd like, how about joining me for Eekfest? When I got up in the morning, the table was set with delicious-looking scrambled eggs and sausages, and there was steaming hot soup ready to be served. Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to have someone cook for me. It's been a while. But wasn't it a lot of trouble? Not at all. I was making some for myself anyway. I hope it's to your liking. Let's dig in. Yum! This is delicious. I'm glad to hear that. Since Mary has work, I've taken on most of the household chores, but Mary never just left everything to me. Au contraire, she was always eager to help out with the chores to the point where I felt embarrassed. Ed surely has a good eye for people. He's lucky to have married such a wonderful woman. For a wonderful woman like Mary, when I looked to John for agreement, he just smiled and nodded indeed. Us life together seemed to have no issues. However, about a month after we started living together, I noticed a change in Mary. She still helped with chores whenever she could, but she started to spend more time alone in her room. After meals, she'd quickly retire to her room and wouldn't come out until morning. Even in the mornings, she used to have breakfast with us, but now she'd quickly retire to her room and wouldn't come out until morning. Even in the mornings, she used to have breakfast with us, but now she'd leave for work before we even got up. Did I do something to make her dislike me? I feel so lonely. I couldn't help but vent to John when he returned home late one night. Are you sure you're not overthinking it? Besides, Mary might just need some time to herself, he replied. I know, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being avoided. Living together with us, Mary must have been putting in a lot of effort every day. Perhaps she had grown tired of that.
Don't worry too much about it. It's not good for your health. And don't you go collapsing again.
I had previously been hospitalized for a stroke.
Remembering that, John looked worried as he stroked my back.
I'm fine. I'm taking my medication regularly now. But maybe you're right. I should stop overthinking things. After that, Mary started to avoid me more overtly, but I tried my best not to let it bother me. Weekdays were still bearable, but weekends were hard. Just on weekends, John would go out by himself, leaving me and Mary together. But lately, Mary had been refusing even my invitations. And perhaps out of dislike, she started leaving the house every weekend. Where are you heading out? I ran into Mary on her way to the entrance and asked her casually. She frowned and said sharply, "It's none of your business, Mom. Just leave me alone." At that, she quickly left the house. I could clearly feel the rejection. It hurt more than I expected, as we had gotten along well in the beginning. But since then, I've naturally started avoiding Mary too. How will it be like this until Mike returns from AOE? Would it be better for us both if we stopped living together now? I wanted to discuss it with John, but he was never around when I needed him. He was away on a 2-week business trip, dreading the weekends, I started going out more to avoid seeing Mary. I really didn't want to see Mary's face. So on that day off, I went out shopping as well. When I returned home, I could hear Mary's voice coming from the direction of the living room. She seemed to be talking to someone. Since Mary wouldn't have guests over without telling me, she must be on the phone. "I'm home," I said, approaching the room. As I was about to slide open the door, I realized Mary was indeed on the phone. Sure enough, she was on the phone. Convinced, I decided not to disturb her and was about to leave the area. That was when it happened. Mary raised her voice. "No, I can't, John. That's impossible." Mary's words made me stop in my tracks. I had definitely heard John. But no, John was supposed to be on a business trip. It seemed unlikely he'd call Mary from there. Yet I could still hear Mary saying, "John, that's why I can't." An inexplicable unease began to bubble up inside me. I approached the room where Mary was once more and listened quietly. I could hear Mary's voice, but not the person she was speaking to. Without hearing both sides, I couldn't be sure it was John nor understand the context of their conversation. Sure enough, Mary was speaking with John, her ex-husband, and he was asking her for a favor. Frustrated, I couldn't decide whether to leave or to interrupt. So I just stood there. Meanwhile, Mary sounded troubled over the phone, repeating, "That's why it's impossible," several times. But this was John asking her for a favor. Maybe I should offer to help. But what if she finds out I've been eavesdropping? It could worsen the already strained relationship between Mary and me. The thought saddened me since things were already tense as they were. As I was lost in my thoughts, Mary let out a pained cry. Almost simultaneously, I heard the sound of something dropping. Soon after, I heard John's deep voice fill the room. "Swap this medicine with that one." Probably Mary had dropped her smartphone, causing it to switch to speaker mode inadvertently. Mary must have quickly picked it up because John's voice faded, and only hers was audible again. "Before long," she said, and then there was silence. She must have ended the call. I let out a sigh of relief and quietly went back to the entrance. Taking another deep breath to compose myself, I called out with feigned calm, "I'm home."
"Oh, welcome back." Her expression was rigid as she returned to her room.
Why was she on the phone with John? And who was the I mentioned in the call? Above all, the ominous phrase "swap the medicine" stuck in my mind. I considered asking Mary several times but couldn't muster the courage. I wondered if Mary and John had been in touch behind my back. John's tone on the phone was uncharacteristically commanding. He doesn't even talk to me like that. What if John's request had something to do with their past, or worse, with me? What if Mary was plotting something behind my back? Or worse, what if John was threatening her? The unease wouldn't leave me, and I couldn't sleep that night. The next day, I was out of sorts from lack of sleep. Dropping my heavy eyes, I was drinking water in the kitchen when Mary appeared. "Good morning, Mary." I greeted her with a hoarse voice due to the sleepless night.
"Good morning."
"You don't seem well. What's wrong? Could this be related to yesterday's phone call?" Concerned, I peered at her face and was shocked. Mary's eyes, usually 8 with double eyelids, were swollen to slits. Her cheeks wet with tears that continued to fall. "Mary, what's wrong?" Are you okay? I instinctively took her hand, and she gripped mine back tightly. I'm sorry, Amy. Through tears, Mary explained something to me. It was hard to believe and incredibly shocking. I was so shocked after hearing everything, I didn't know how to react. Just stunned by Mary's sudden confession, my mind went completely blank. As I stood there dazed, Mary's tears continued to fall. I'm so sorry, Amy, so sorry. She kept repeating her apologies. Snapping back to reality, I hugged her tightly. What are you talking about? It's not all John's fault. It's my fault for keeping silent. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, Mary. There are things that everyone finds impossible to share. Besides, Mike is okay with it, so it's not for John or me to interfere in a couple's private matters. Saying it out loud helped me to start thinking more clearly. His anger towards John began to bubble up inside me. How many years have we been married now? We fought, even talked about separation, but I always intended to spend the rest of my life with him. I never imagined he could do such a thing behind my back. After a while, when Mary had calmed down, we started to talk about what to do next. We should contact Mike before John returns from his business trip. Mr. Mary was reluctant to interrupt his work, but I disagreed. Mike would care about you more than his job. How do you think he'd feel finding out about your troubles later? At that, Mary silently agreed. But when we tried to call Mike, we couldn't get through. Maybe he was busy or sleeping. We didn't know, so we decided to send an email instead, summarizing the key points and asking him to call back when he could. 2 days later, John returned from his business trip. At the crow, "Oh, I'm beat," he repeated as he handed me his bag and coat. While taking them, I said mechanically, "Welcome back." He looked around the living room. "Something wrong?" I asked. "Was just wondering where Mary is." He glanced around again. "Oh, she's out running some errands. Did you need her for something?" I asked with a smile, but he just looked away. "No, not really." "The bath's ready," I told him, and he just replied with a short okay and headed to the bathroom. While he bathed, I laid out the prepared papers on the table. I felt mixed emotions about confronting John with them. After decades of marriage, I never wanted to resort to such a thing. Oh, that was a great bath. John looked content as he sat at the table with a towel around his neck. Normally, he would down a beer that was waiting for him. "Kay, where's the beer? Da beer today?" I said, and he handed him the papers instead. Perched by me, John looked at the documents laid out on the table, and his eyes went wide. What is this?" Still staring at the table, John trembled. I clenched my fist tightly and said firmly, "It's divorce papers." "I want a divorce."
Divorce? Why?
From John's voice and expression, I felt anger more than confusion. This entamatu PR. It was as if he wanted to shout, "How dare you tell me you want a divorce?" "But you wanted this, right? Actions, the divorce."
The divorce? No, I mean, that's not, he was mumbling, his words faltering.
I couldn't help but burst into laughter. "What's so funny?" I asked. "Because you're just so flustered. You didn't want a divorce. You wanted to remarry, didn't you?" John fell silent, his eyes darting from right to left. "I mean, I know everything." At my words, John's face turned ashen. "Everything? that you've been cheating with another woman. That you tried to tamper with my medication to be with her. And most unforgivably, that you threatened Mary. Hun's face, already pale, now began to drip with sweat. As he did so, he kept repeating, "No, that's not it." No use denying it. I heard it all from Mary. Mary, that backstabber, we had debts from before we got married. It seems that John found out about it when she was talking to Mike on the phone. She couldn't afford to live alone because she wanted to use her rent money for repayments. Once John knew she had no money, he must have felt superior to Mary. He had her do chores and treated her like a maid without you knowing. Since Mary couldn't afford to be thrown out, she couldn't stand up to John. She was keeping an eye on John every weekend to get away from him. That's when she caught him cheating, because when she confronted him, he had the gall to say, "Amy will be the one who gets hurt." Then, as if resigned, since it's out now, he commanded Mary to tamper with the medicine. "So you thought of getting rid of me because I was in the way, huh?" Having suffered a stroke before, I take medication daily without fail. It's the kind that keeps my blood from clotting. If I don't take it, I'm at high risk for clots, which could be life-threatening. Incredibly, John was planning to swap my medication with something else. Best of all things, you were going to swap it with vitamin pills. For most people, vitamins are just a supplement, but for me, they could be poison. Depending on the type, they could promote clotting and increase my risk of thrombosis. In other words, John was after my life. Anyway, I can't be with you anymore. Please, let's get a divorce. We'll discuss the settlement through lawyers later.
Barry, you would do this to me. And you understand what you're in for.
Actually,
Ari, you would do this to me. You understand what you're in for?
action.
I understand. I'm fine now. I have Amy. What did you say? Getting cocky, are we? Thon's eyes were bloodshot, and it looked like he might lunge at me any moment. But then, the next thing I knew, there was a racket at the front door, and Mike appeared out of ease. "Are you okay?" Mike stood in front of John as if to shield Mary. "Mike, why are you here?" "I got a call from Mom and rushed back from overseas. But I'm disappointed in you. Using Mary's debt as leverage. How could you?" John fell to his knees, looking flustered. At first, I just wanted to use her weakness to eke things off. But then I needed money. Either way, it's despicable. I don't want to see your face ever again. That out now. But wait, Amy, are you sure about this? You're a stay-at-home mom with no income. You won't be able to make ends meet. Don't you worry. I'll be fine with the alimony I'll get from him. And by the way, this house was inherited from my parents, so don't you act all high and mighty.
Tom was still trying to act tough.
But when I threatened to call the cops, he shuffled out. After that, John and I got divorced. It turned out John had been secretly giving money to his mistress, and a good chunk of our savings was gone. I guess now I know why he needed money. As a settlement, I decided to take all the remaining savings. Un's future looked bleak, nearing retirement with zero savings. And with his son declaring him dead to the family, he's really in for a rough ride. Whether his mistress will stick with him through this hard-mode life, I doubt it, but honestly, I couldn't care less. Mike went back to work the day after we settled everything, looking like he didn't want to leave. Mary and I are still living together. I used the alimony I got from John to pay off Mary's debts. Her son and his wife wanted to pay it back themselves, but with interest rates being what they are, it seemed wasteful. Since it was John's money anyway, I wanted to get rid of it fast. Now, the regular mother-in-law and daughter-in-law girls' nights are what I look forward to the most.